because that's their survival link. But now it becomes fun. Now it's purposeful. Now they have built a healthy, engaging relationship with you, their first love, and they're in it with you. So those first 12 months are critical for hearing, listening, perceiving, discriminating, and then finally understanding. And those words do have different concepts. And when I use them, I try to be very, very specific. It's really honing and building and strengthening the whole listening system, their auditory cortex.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started.
Hello and welcome, new mamas, new daddies, and grandparents. This week's episode, we continue the deep dive into the critical developmental milestone of cooing and babbling. And if you have an older toddler, hold on, this is for you too. If you have a 20-month-old, 24, 26, 30-month-old, perhaps you're looking at a late talker, and that has a lot of different definitions. You don't want to dismiss these insights because it can truly help you analyze and figure out how the puzzle pieces fit together. Did he skip these stages? Could that be why he's not chatting so much right now? And then how can you use the suggestions I give on the second half of this episode to help you support his growth now? Remember, speech and language is a multifaceted intricate processing system. It has both the physical elements using those 100 muscles for human verbal speech. And then we have the expressive and receptive language component. All of these pieces fit together, and your child cannot and typically does not develop these in isolation. It's an acquisition process. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, number 75, it might serve you the best to go back and listen first, because there I build the stage. I differentiate between cooing and babbling, and then I start the deep dive with babbling stages 1 and 2. I want you to be able to identify where the challenges are early, understand exactly where your baby is on this journey, head off any missteps, zone in, and then nurture any weak links. Then, mom, dad, grandma, you can proceed with confidence and watch your child master. That's what it's all about. So now let's look at stage number 3, canonical babbling. And what that means is that there's a lot more purposeful movement, intentional practice. And this happens between 6 and 10 months, again, with some wiggle room. But there are 2 primary subtypes in canonical babbling. The first one is what we in my field refer to as reduplicated babbling. And I think this is kind of the general conception of what babbling is, what all babbling is. It's when your baby will repeat the same syllable over and over again. It'll sound like ga, 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 or goo, 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 ma, 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 right? So they have 3 or 4 times they'll repeat the exact same syllable. But here's where it gets a little fun, again, in my kind of strange life, is that through this reduplicated babbling, your baby is literally practicing different combinations and experimenting. Again, this is the brilliance with introducing solid foods at this age, at 5, 6, 7, 8 months of age. They're honing both of those skills. And you'll see that through this repeated syllable that they'll create different rhythmic patterns. And so that's where we hear mama, dada. Now, most babies through most cultures will say those two syllable patterns because it's one of the easiest. We, over the years, and I know that I've crushed a lot of hearts saying that mama and dada or papa are just easy motor planning skills. They're not really, at 6, 7, 8 months, really calling you mama or dada. But soon they will. Soon we will teach them, yes, that's me. Yes, that's my name, mama. And I point to me, mama, or dada, or papa, whatever those easier reduplicating patterns. But by reinforcing that, you're teaching them one of their first words. A good speech therapist will always ask, what was his or her first words besides mama and papa or mama and dada? Because that really tells us the other oral motor planning, the other speech sounds. Like my daughter was kitty. Now, reduplicated babbling is crucial because there's a lot of vocal play and they're building their muscle strength and planning skills, elongating them, shorting them out, moving from the back of the mouth to the front of the mouth, isolating movements, the jaw, the lips, the front of the tongue, the back of the tongue. And it teaches them to control these sounds and practice in a variety of intonations. It really helps your baby learn how to process and at the same time distinguish between different sounds. It sharpens that cognitive skills that I mentioned in the very beginning. So during this reduplicated phase, right, they're repeating the same syllable. They're building a lot of motor skills and auditory skills. They're learning to contrast. Were those sounds the same or were they different? They also have to begin to map out neurologically, acoustically, where those sounds or where those changes occurred. So for example, and I have this written, I have the contrast between pup, P-U-P, pup, and cup, C-U-P. So the p in the first position and the k are the two sounds that change. And so your baby acoustically, auditorily, has to recognize, only that very first sound, which is about 35 milliseconds in duration, changed. Everything else, the up part, stayed the same. Pup, cup, pup, cup. And when we talk in normal adult speed, that's quick. And then you contrast that with pan, pat. Pan, pat. So now the n at pan and pat, the t, differ. They're not the same anymore. We use the same technique when we're building what we call phonological processing and phonics when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. Again, needing that auditory attention and discrimination skills necessary for breaking the code to literacy. It starts at cooing and babbling. I kid you not. I know you might be thinking, I don't know about that, Erin, but that's how we're wiring the brain, the auditory system. And that's why rhyming is not only entertaining, it's wickedly important, even with one-syllable words. So listen to this group, and I always use this as an easy example, but where your child has to auditorily discriminate that very first consonant because the vowel stays the same. And it's a lot of really detailed listening. So here's the group. Me, see, be, key, she, knee, three, he, tree, gee, pee, we, tea. So you're thinking, all right, whatever, they're rhyming words. But what I'm sharing is that vowel, all of our vowels in English language are always longer and louder. They're longer in duration. E is longer than P or K or M. So what happens, there's a term for it, we call it backwards masking, where the vowel can mask that initial phoneme sound. And so it gets confusing when your child's older and they're learning how to spell or decode words and all of that. But this is why this cooing and babbling stages are so important. We are training the ears, the auditory cortex, to pay attention, notice changes. What sequence were the sound patterns in? Notice if they're the same or they're different. Listen. Pattern after pattern after pattern. This is what we refer to as fine auditory discrimination, sequencing. If you want your baby and your toddler to be a competent communicator, a listener, and then a strong reader and writer, it starts here with cooing and babbling. So now let's move on to the second subtype of canonical babbling, and that's called variegated. It means variety, right? The first one was reduplicated. It means just repeating the same syllable. Now we're going to vary it up. During this second subtype, your baby experiments with combining different consonants and different vowels in a variety of ways, right? And you'll watch your baby, him or her, experiment with different consonant and vowel sounds in a variety of ways. And they're striving to form more complex and non-repetitive syllable sequences. And this is much more purposeful. So for example, your daughter or son might say something like, body-dee-dee, body-dee-dee. And you're like, well, what the heck does that mean, right? Where's my Dee-Dee? My daughter's nickname for her blanket was Dee-Dee. Or they're just practicing moving because they have much more control over these oral motor movement patterns through practice and stimulation with you, through self-play, through biting and chewing and eating. All of this is coming together. And it's really quite exciting because this is when your little one begins to display their kind of creativity with their language. And they'll have the intonation patterns and the sing-songy just like you, right? And it really begins to develop her ability to make more complex and meaningful speech sounds. And you'll see them going from the back of the mouth to the front of the mouth and really, really playing it up. And of course, as you move closer to that first birthday, those speech sounds will develop into first approximations or first real words, right? Remember, I laid out those initial sounds. And so sometimes, like blanket was too hard for my daughter, and somehow she just figured out Dee-Dee was a whole heck of a lot better. That was her nickname. We reinforced that. That's not considered baby talk. It was what she labeled her beautiful white blanket. Of course, it had to be white. It was always being washed. But variegated babbling, what we refer to as variety, also helps your little guy or gal understand and distinguish between these sounds. So they've been auditorily mapping and listening to your variety of speech sounds, and now they're going to practice that. And that's where that turn-taking and conversational flow really starts to emerge. So all of this auditory information is really for a separate episode. But for now, I want you to always go back that auditory skills, honing that auditory begins in utero before birth. And then within those first 24, 36 hours, right, their cry is going to match the inflections, the melody of their native language, because that's their survival link. But now it becomes fun. Now it's purposeful. Now they have built a healthy, engaging relationship with you, their first love, and they're in it with you. So those first 12 months are critical for hearing, listening, perceiving, discriminating, and then finally understanding. And those words do have different concepts. And when I use them, I try to be very, very specific. But here we're going to chunk them all together because it's just easier right now. It's really honing and building and strengthening the whole listening system, their auditory cortex. And that's what we have to always keep in mind. And there's a dance to it. So I do want to kind of step on a sidebar right here, because I know that in my episodes here, I'm excited and eager to really share what I've learned through all of my study and my real life experience on the floor with hundreds and hundreds of children. And so I'm always using the term, oh, this is important, so listen up, or that's important. So try to wrap your mind around that. And if you haven't figured it out, I say this is important because I think, unfortunately, the vast majority of us humans, but especially new moms or new parents, really minimize a lot of the developmental milestones in those first couple of years. One, because I think life in general is overwhelming. It's all new. I talked about that in a previous episode. You're trying to reconcile who you were before you got pregnant and now this role of motherhood. But as a culture, I think we're also in denial. And it could be consciously or subconsciously. We could be doing it just as survival, that we develop these habits of putting blinders on because it's too risky to look around. It's too risky to go there, right? It feels uncomfortable. And yes, we as humans do this often, right? That we move away from danger because nobody likes that sense of panic or uncertainty. And I once heard that plants don't move toward the light or toward the sun. They actually move away from the darkness. And I thought, wow, we humans do that too, right? We turn away. And I know you know this old saying that naivete is bliss, or even ignorance is bliss, because it is. It's a lot more comfortable to just wear the blinders or stick my head in the sand. Because if you think of it, ignorance or naivete, it just means there's a lack of knowledge. And that lack of knowledge results in a sense of comfort, a sense of appeasement. And you might ask, well, why the heck are you talking about this, Erin? It's because it's more comfortable to not know certain things. And I get that. I totally get that. And I've been studying on this and praying and meditating and doing long walks for a decade now. Why aren't more people up in arms with our children's health and well-being? Why aren't my colleagues saying the old model isn't working? And I think we as humans, we choose to stay in the dark because opening our eyes scares us too much, right? It's like I said, motherhood in general is already overwhelming. And if we start really looking at the risks in this modern world of ours, and I know every generation has their risks, right? I can't imagine, being the first pioneers here in the United States. How the heck did they survive? But I live in 2024, and I know this new role is daunting, But what I'm trying to bring through these episodes and on this channel is that if you choose to really live in the moment, live with more knowledge, live more intentionally, that's the way we all grow and learn and change the course of our children's future. Because it's this trial and error and willingness to go and be a little uncomfortable and not stick our head in the sand and hope and pray and wait, like the most of the systems suggest. Wait and see. Don't worry. You're just letting your hormones get to you. And I know it's much more comfortable in the moment to ignore it or to live in this bubble. I've done it in my, multiple decades of life. I've done it in business, in my own personal health and well-being, in relationships, and certainly with my daughter during those teen years that I'm trying to rectify now. God bless her. Our finances, for sure. We all do it when we're going through a rough time or when we're in one of those major transitions and you are in the thick of it as a first-time mom. And I talked about this, the whole new mom imposter syndrome and what that is or is not. And I even did it recently. It took me over 5 years to really finally close my practice because I had to admit that this old model of come to therapy into my office, use my one-way mirror, that was helpful, more than helpful. Let me get on the floor and demonstrate. And most of the time it was once a week. Sometimes we could do it twice a week. That is no longer the best practice, in my opinion. It's not enough to move the needle. It's not enough to close the gaps. It's not enough to change the course of a child's life and the whole dynamics of your family. I mean, we can use it. It can be part of the plan. But what I'm trying to bring light to is that it starts with you at home, wherever you are. Whether you have a newborn, whether he's 18 months or 30 months. I'm focusing in on prevention, to be more intentional, proactive. And I know it's hard to admit, but it typically starts with us mamas. If you want to give your child the best in life, it starts with you. Your attention, your love, your presence, your openness to learn. Because it's hard to hear. When I, go on my soapbox like this one, and I'll get off in a minute, but when I share that 54% of American children have a chronic disorder, that's mind-boggling to me. When I share just my experience in 35 years as a practicing therapist with early intervention, being in the thick of it, watching the numbers escalate and switch, that autism is rising. Today, it's 1 in 36 children. When in the late 1980s, when I graduated from university, it was 1 in 10,000. I don't know what goes through your head when you hear statistics like that. If you do just put your blinders on, or if you say, wow, that doesn't sound healthy. But I started to really, I think my field started to open up, but I started in around 2015 in the sense that we started to look at the rise in speech and language delays since the introduction of the iPhones, which was, I think, in 2006. And some of the first studies were out of the UK in which we saw an 18% spike in those first 8 to 10 years since the iPhone. And it wasn't at that time, it wasn't necessarily that babies were using the iPhone as much as parents were distracted or primary caretakers were distracted. And now the rise since the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, the distancing, and all of this, just the stress and anxiety in the air, what the research that's now starting to surface, and I have a couple of links down below, it looks like the rise of speech and language delay communication has doubled. That means babies born from 2018 till now, we need to get out in front of it. We need to admit that we're at risk, at least. Take the blinders off. And as I said, I have a couple of links that really talk about what our systems are facing. And here's the truth, that our systems, our early intervention systems that every state has, our private practice settings that focus on early intervention, the 0 to 3 population and beyond, right? The 3 to 6. So, and our school systems, our healthcare providers, and I've shared with you in the past that the whole department there in Vermont, when I was there a couple of years ago, closed down because they had a 2-year waiting list and they had no idea how they would manage it. And this was part of the state system in which they sent children to rule out or rule in autism, by their second birthday, which again, I think is late. But what I'm saying is there was no way that we could really manage all that well before the pandemic. And so there has always been a shortage of speech language pathologists. I've always kind of joked and said, I could get a job anywhere in the world, right? Every country has a shortage. And so instead of trying to fix the system, I can't do that from the inside, not one person, right? And so I'm trying to go to the source, you, mom, dad, grandma, your family. How do we empower you? How do we give the baton back to you and enlighten your power, your ability? Because we were overwhelmed before the pandemic, and I'm here to tell you that it ain't looking good going forth. I can be more impactful, more honest and direct if I help you, if I arm you, if I encourage you on a daily basis to stay ahead of it. To build and create what I refer to, and a lot of us do in this field, a language-rich home lifestyle. And it's through nutrition, it's through connection, it's through that one-to-one playtime, it's through everyday experiences. And here's the real inside scoop. You can learn what true healthy developmental expectations are. And that's why I'm talking about babbling and cooing here. Just pulling that out of all of the different milestones and saying, how can we zone in on here and make this measurable? How can we foster them at home, nurture them naturally every single day? Because that's what we did before we had all these systems. 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And my take, it's not rocket science. Yes, there's nuances. And I've said this to hundreds of patients over the years. I can help you interpret the nuances, but you have the beautiful skill to just learn these, to put down that limited mindset that you're not enough, or that a quote unquote specialist, a therapist who has a few initials after a name knows more than you do, or that daycare provider does. At the end of the day, it's good, high quality parenting that we've done for centuries. It's being intentional and being proactive. And while I'm on this soapbox, I'll reiterate, you don't need a lot of stuff either. You don't need fancy gadgets, baby gadgets, or fancy battery-operated devices. You don't even need, in my opinion, those expensive prepackaged play kits. And I think you all know what they are. They're nice, they're beautiful, but your baby right now, your baby and your toddler, I know you know what I'm going to say here. He needs you. Maybe a few classic toys like trucks and blocks, and I think somewhere I have a list of my favorites. Lots of books at different stages, rhyming. And then when they're up and about at 2, leftover, repurposed household products. A duster, a dustpan, a spray bottle, some paintbrushes, some old Tupperware where he can learn or practice and engage with cooking and cleaning and dress up and building. And then, of course, go outside and be really creative. Let the magic happen out there. So I just wanted to reiterate what's my driving force, my mission here. And I know sometimes it can sound like a soapbox, but I love babies. And my heart goes out to you, Mama. Because it's such a beautiful experience to watch the magic happen, the miracle of building human communication and building a loving relationship and watching them grow and create and hone their curiosity. So thank you for listening to that. I'll step off my soapbox and get back to babbling. There's just one final stage, but I think it's important to always go back to the why. Why am I here? Why are you here? What do we see? Okay, so number 4 is conversational babbling. And we call it conversational babbling because your baby uses a lot of jargon that sounds like conversation. And it typically starts around 10 months of age. As your baby unfolds, these month markers aren't written in stone, but they are guideposts that we have to be mindful of. So at this time, somewhere around 10 months, the sounds that your baby makes will begin to resemble the sound of your adult conversation. They'll practice pausing and using some rhythms and intonation that they've heard, right? They do that through their crying in those first couple of days. And then they learned how to imitate through cooing. Now they're really moving all of their oral motor musculature, getting that in sync with their inhalation and exhalation. Phonating, right? That phonation is when our vocal cords vibrate, right? Based on our airflow. And they even mimic the conversational turn taking, going back and forth, right? You and your baby. And I'm sure a lot of you have done this, but this is really incredibly important to reinforce. And I have shared a number of times, both in my private practice and here on these episodes, that there's an epic YouTube video, and I'll have the link down below. And the young man's name is DJ Pryor. And at the time he had, I think it's 4 or 5 years old now, but at the time he had a 19-month-old named Kingston. They're adorable. They're sitting on the couch. Sounds like they're watching a basketball game. And I know that there are quite a few excellent examples online now, but this spoke to me in volumes back then, and I've always referred to it. And part of it is that this little video was so remarkable, so outstanding for the time, that companies actually hired, or organizations, state organizations mostly, I think, hired this young man and his toddler to go and give presentations to new parents regarding the importance of what is termed serve and return. It's that tennis term, right, that I've talked about even in cooing, right? The baby accidentally makes that sound, and then you imitate that, right? So he gives you a serve, even if it's accidental, and you return it. But now at 10 months, that serve and return, that give and take is purposeful. And you should hear quite a bit of it. And through these months, as your baby is beginning to emerge in the serve and return, you're helping them practice listening, taking pauses, like I said, and then responding. And it really is this beautiful network of learning what social communication or a conversational flow is. So at 10, 12, 14 months, your baby's first real words will be mixed up in a lot of this jargon. You might hear him say, "Mama, go badika," "Mama, go bidaka," or whatever the variety is, but he's using mama to get your attention. He's saying, "Hey, you, listen up. I need to go outside," whatever his jargon is representing. So knowing the stages of babbling is a tool that you can use to truly monitor growth and progress over time, especially in that first year, 18 months. And because of that, I generated a quick outline for you all because I know it's a lot of detail. And there's a link down below. But let's just recap briefly. The first is the phonation stage, right? Birth to 2 months is what we look at as more natural or vegetative sounds. The cry, the cough, the grunt, the sneeze, the hiccup, all of those sounds that accidentally or reflexively come out of him, he's drawing attention to. If you ever teased a baby who sneezed and you sneezed back, you would realize that's engaging, right? But that's more vegetative. The second one is the cooing stage, 2 to 3 months that I outlined up above, is more primitive movements. They're really exploring the lips and the tongue. They're beginning to coordinate the vowel-like and consonant-like sounds, quite often by mistake, and we reinforce that. The third major stage is the expansion stage, the first of which is marginal babbling between 4 and 6 months of age, beginning to produce what we refer to in my field as fully resonant vowel sounds, right? The ooh, ah, along with squealing and yelling and growling and raspberries and laughter, all of those marginal babbling. They're not word-like, but they're engaging, right? He's interested in making noise and playing with them with you. And lo and behold, that's when we also introduce solid foods, giving them another channel to exercise. Then the fourth stage is canonical babbling, which again means much more purposeful. It's between 6 and 10 months of age. There are 2 subtypes, but your baby really begins to produce sounds that we can recognize as syllables, right? They're mixing up the consonants, mixing up the vowels, and playing with intention. And those 2 subtypes are reduplicated and then non-reduplicated. Reduplicated would be ba 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 ba, mama mama, and then non-reduplicated is when he mixes it up. Dee dee da beeb da, mama gag ga, right? So a few different vowels, a few different consonants. The consonants and the vowels make up those 44 different sounds in English. And then there's the jargon stage, which between 10 and 15 months of age, again, giving a little wiggle room on either side. But this is where your baby and now toddler, right, as he learns to tot around, is really building more complex babbling with prosody, right? The prosody is the melody of our language and it matches their native language. So it sounds gibberish-like, but the babbles really take on the tones, inflections of our adult speech. They're really honing their auditory skills and trying their best to to be an adult talker, right? And then the final stage are those first words that start to emerge around that first birthday. And you want to see it grow steadily. So typically a 12-month-old will have a handful of real words interspersed with a lot of jargon, a lot of intonation play. Don't forget to, click on that link below and listen to DJ Pryor and his lovely toddler. But then all the way up through 18 months of age. And 18 months of age, they should have 20, 30 words by their second birthday. They're really predominantly using real words because they have a larger pool. We're striving for a minimum of 50 words maximum, or there is really no maximum. But, many, many, many healthy, robust, thriving toddlers will have 200 or 300 words. And with that, they no longer have to practice with jargon patterns or figuring out how to put these sounds together to match their native language. They have enough words to converse, right? To be a communicative partner. And they're really learning how to do that. I do also have a link down below that I get a lot of this data from, and how we really study the phases of cooing and then the ages and stages of babbling. This is all documented research. This is what we have learned over the last 100 years. If you want some evidence, you can link down below, or there is a link down below. And as I always stress here, the importance of these stages and what you can do to promote this. A rule of thumb that quiet babies are often overlooked because they're thought of as good babies. Oh, he's easygoing. He's not noisy. He doesn't even cry all that much, right? But we want noisy babies. We want babies who are eager to converse with us. And that delayed babbling can often be an important indicator of speech and language delays and other more serious developmental problems. And I assure you, it's not the only factor, but it's something that is worthy to take a look at and could be part of the puzzle. And is very common, and at least historically, in my 35 years of practice, parents have shared that it's pretty comfortable to say, oh, my kid is going to a speech therapist, right? Because quite often speech therapy's thought of as someone who has a funny R or a lisp or a stutter or this or that. And they're really not looking at quote unquote developmental issues. That has kind of shifted in the last 10 years as I've shared how more serious developmental issues are escalating and the numbers are getting more and more noticeable. But I think it's important that we don't disregard any of this. And if I was a new mom today, and if I was literally sitting face to face with you, having coffee, I would say I would be on it through every step of the way. Not a helicopter mom, not someone who is throwing flashcards at your 2-year-old. No, 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 no. But to be in it, engaged, playing, purposeful, intentional, when you're feeding, when you're changing, when you're putting him in and out of the car seat, as much as humanly possible. I know that you have 1,000 other things to do, and I'm not saying 24/7, but I would never dismiss anything that could be a little yellow flag to say, hey, take a peek over here. Take off your blinders and see, how can I stay on track as best as possible? All kids are not the same. I know that. But there are guideposts that tell us a lot. And I will continue to cover different milestones and zone in on them, right? Because that's how you can purposefully gauge where's my toddler today? How do we stay on track? Is he sliding off a wee bit? And if I tweak here and there, can we get back on track? Or do I really need to call someone and revamp? Or even if you have to call someone, change your game plan at home now, today. The bottom line is, if any child is not babbling by 7 or 8 months of age, I would pick up the phone and call a speech language pathologist. And if you don't get some support, reinforcement to say, hey, mom, good for you. I commend you for picking up the phone. Then call somebody else. Or dive deep into this, click the link below and get the outline. You need to change some things at home. That's the truth. That's reality. And these are my suggestions. The first big step is to notice your child's babble and how you do or don't respond. So the first thing is to pause and wait. Wait for your child to babble. When babies aren't yet talking, it's easy for us to fill in that white noise. And I've mentioned this a little bit before, but I think it needs to be highlighted in the sense that all moms, and I've been guilty of this, is telling moms, oh, you need to talk to your baby. You need to talk to your baby. But not 24/7, because then they sit back and say, hey, she's got this. I'm cute enough and I'm happy enough and I don't need to do this vocalization thing. So the first thing is to always pause and wait when you're changing or playing or eating. But you do some nonverbal things. You wink, you smile, you raise your eyebrows, blow them a quiet kiss, you shrug your shoulders, you wave. You do some nonverbal, some gestures. Remember, 16 gestures by 16 months. But it's quiet. See if they vocalize, right? We want to see, where are they? Because sometimes if we say nothing and just wait, your baby, your child will learn how to initiate. Through that quiet, that white space, you're encouraging them to make sounds on his own. But you don't just sit there with a blank face and say, oh, okay, whenever you're ready to talk. No, you're encouraging them with that nonverbal communication, enticing him, right? High-fiving, shrugging, pointing at something, blowing him a kiss. Okay, so that's the first one, right? You pause and you wait. And then the second way to notice, where are we on this, is to observe your child from a distance. Observe carefully when he does babble, because there are two levels at this early phase. So the first one is he might babble by needing to send you a message, right? So if you observe him pointing and then babbling, he's trying to get your attention. It's likely that is an intentional babble and that he's sending you a message. But if you observe your child babbling while he's busy playing and you're not involved, then he doesn't want your attention. He's just practicing. These are new skills and he's testing it out. We often talk to ourselves, right? Both are important. We want him to babble to get your attention and share something or call you over. And we want him to practice. Quite often, as you may have already experienced or I love it to hear when babies talk to themselves first thing in the morning. My daughter did that. Talk to her little stuffy animals or finger play or whatever. But we want to observe and notice both of these. And then the third notice step would be you imitate your child's babble. If you figured out that your child really isn't sending you a specific message by babbling, a great strategy, and I've said this before, but is to imitate his sounds. And we do this when they're younger. We don't do this when they're older. But you're showing them how to imitate, how to copy his sounds. So you're paying attention. And then you're demonstrating, what you said was interesting and caught my attention. It's important. And I know there's a lot of literally hand over hand teaching your child. But it's just in the beginning. It's when they're beginning to emerge. And what you're doing is reinforcing. You're shining a light onto that. You're drawing his attention. And you do that when they're crawling. You do that when they're walking. You're doing that when they're eating, learning how to eat and chew. And you do that for talking as well. Because by imitating him at this young stage, then it might motivate him to babble again, to build that initial turn taking. But it also hopefully will encourage him to intentionally make sounds to get your attention. So if you highlight when he makes a sound and then you give him that attention, he's like, that's pretty powerful. When I squeal, she comes running. That's pretty cool. Maybe I'll squeal again. Or make a different sound and see if she squeals to that too. I'm pretty powerful. And I've shared with you earlier that this works best, in my opinion, with the younger baby, right? The 6, 8, 10, 12-month-old. Once they get to be toddler age, 12, 14, 6 months, I really stress that you use real words. They're simplified, they're elongated and exaggerated, but they're real words. They have meaning behind them. Because I think reinforcing babbling with a toddler, an older toddler, can delay things, or it builds another layer. We want to close the gap as much as possible. And so in my mind, that's working backwards. Now, for a long while with older kids, with a 3, 4, 5-year-old, I did a lot of what we call nonsense syllable patterns in speech practice. But it took a long time to generalize into real words, into everyday conversational flow. And to me, it was hard to measure. Quite often we would do it as a warm-up, or we'd do it for fun and practice. But I wouldn't, after several years, I think in the early 1990s when I was really diving deep into oral motor, and Sarah Johnson Rosenfeld, who was my mentor, was out front and center helping kids with their motor planning for speech. And she took a lot of the arrows for us because this was a big pivot in my field. And it still is controversial, for lack of a better phrase, but you're going to have some speech therapists that don't even begin to touch oral motor skills. And then a lot of us who have been in it for a long while saw that it made sense, that we couldn't just ignore the physical part of talking. But that too is a different episode, I think. The fourth area, or the fourth way to really observe, is that you act as your child's interpreter. So if you think that your child is trying to tell you something, so before is that he's making sounds and you're giving him great attention to show him the empowerment of initiation. Now, if you think that he is trying to tell you something, then you interpret that, even if it's a wild guess, right? So for example, if you're, walking down the street or in the car and he points out the window and he sees a big bus and he says, ba, 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 right? So that's reduplicated, ba, 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 ba. And so you interpret that by saying, yes, that's a bus, school bus, beep, beep, school bus. So when you interpret his message with real words, then you're providing him that label. And then he starts to shape his speech and language. And this will eventually build and add up his vocabulary. And that's why I always say, after that first birthday, use real words as his interpreter. So now I'm going to give you the major suggestions for older toddlers, but you would also use these naturally with your babies, right? Your 3, 4, 5-month-old all the way up to his first birthday. But especially if you have that 16, 18, 24, 36 month nursery rhymes, you now know why, right? Because of all of the phonemes, the different sounds, the rhythm. You can sing the nursery rhymes and use books, rhyming books. Animal sounds. I'm always talking about animal sounds here because those are fun and interesting, intriguing. We can repeat them 1,000 times. Environmental sounds. So we can use these. We don't have to go back to babbling, but animal sounds isn't babbling, right? It's our human interpretation of what those animal sounds make. And the joke has always been, it's like, what does a giraffe sound like? I've never quite mastered that. And it's always been kind of a fun joke with moms. But animal sounds and then environmental sounds, right? The honk of the school bus or beep, beep, beep of the truck or vroom, wee, or swish or gulping, right? Kids love it when I pretend to gulp in a cup. I don't know if you can hear that, but you can see me in the video. Boom. If there's an explosion, right? Or sirens, baby crying, you can imitate all the sounds that babies make, or yawning. Oh, oh, right? They love that. Or snoring, sneezing, of course, coughing, loud kisses. They will imitate all of these social and environmental sounds. And again, building motor planning skills, imitation skills, initiation skills, all of this, turn-taking skills. The key is purposeful mouth movements and sounds blended together. And like I said, imitation, initiation, turn-taking. And of course, one of the things that I'm always reinforcing here, gestures, body movements, especially as it's linked to singing. Right, but all of those gestural nursery rhymes, the wheels on the bus, and then, of course, one-to-one playtime. And what you want is think of what you would expect a really good therapist would do. And again, I've had a couple of colleagues or friends who I've ended up seeing their kids in therapy, and we've talked extensively about 60% of a good therapist session is that I'm giving your baby 110% of my undivided attention, and I'm in it with them, right? So you want to carve out that one-to-one playtime where there's no distractions in the background, and that allows you to respond in real time. If they make a soft ooh sound, you can respond. If they kiss you from a distance, you can blow them back a kiss. You're going to keep it simple, follow his lead. And what that really means is that you support his interest. If he's really into animals and animal sounds, or the farm set, or he likes trucks or little people, or she likes puzzles and blocks or dollies, whatever they like. If he likes to put the dollies in the trucks, you follow their interest and then make noise around that. And I always say, by keeping it simple, meaning pick 1 or 2 toy sets. If you have the little people out, I always had the little people farm set, and I have an old version and a newer version, and the old version is meant to last forever. But you can add a few extra vehicles or a few extra animals or some boxes or whatever. But you don't want to just dump a big, huge toy chest out. Keep it simple so they can focus on the noises and the sounds that you're making with the movements and the playing. You know, if you're feeding a baby, add a few clothes, or, throw in a truck where they can transport them and go to the store with mama, or turn over a box and give the baby a bath. Those elements that are relatable to real life. Make it fun. You have to be interesting. If you want your child to engage with you, be interesting, be playful, be present. So paying more attention to babbling as opposed to just cooing and making some noise back, looking at these different stages can really help you move the needle And then with you responding in real time and acting as if your child is really trying to communicate something, talking about something and sharing something with you, not just labeling stuff, looking at a book and say, oh, cup, banana. That has its place. But right now we're trying to build his noise capacity. And it's hard to get him to imitate those real words. Yes, you're helping him with the auditory mapping, but we want this expressive language to come out. And it starts with cooing and babbling and babbling and babbling until it turns into real words. You definitely want them to have that practice in conversation, turn taking, even if it's nonsense, gibberish, jargon, call it whatever you want. So your baby, especially, and toddlers, but infants are very active learners. And it's true, it cuts across all aspects of development. But your infants are looking to act with you because those first 6 months, 8 months, it's all about you. And you're putting your facial expressions and all this beautiful noise that's coming out of your mouth and intriguing him to be a communicator. So one of the myths, and I think a lot of people think this, and I think unfortunately a lot of pediatricians, they think of infants as being passive, that they're just sitting there waiting to absorb whatever you teach them. Well, we want to entice them to pull their weight, right? To attend, that's active, that's doing something. They're focusing in on you. They're engaging with you. They're now going to have vocal play, and they're striving to expand upon that. And if we reinforce that in real time, that's another reason why I discourage screens. There's no engagement. That's totally passive. It does not help your baby or your toddler. So yes, we have some built-in primitive reflexes, some pre-wiring that helps to get the ball rolling, but you mama, you daddy, you grandma or nanny or your primary people, we need to nudge them along. So check out the links below. I'll have an outline. I have some YouTubes that you can refer to. I'll have some links to ages and stages and babbling and all of that. Don't forget to subscribe and help me reach more moms just like you who are in it, looking for answers, looking for encouragement, looking for their own community, people that think alike. Thanks for sharing your precious time with me. And remember, eat, talk, play with meaningful intention every single day. God bless you. God bless your family and your little babies. See you next week.